Hey, darling, do you have a quick second to lend me a hand? James said with a comforting grin, his arm slipping gently around my shoulders in a familiar protective gesture. I'm well into my 7th month of pregnancy, and though I gave a small nod of agreement, a persistent knot of anxiety had been twisting in my stomach for weeks, refusing to let go. Each of his requests, delivered in that soft, almost too sweet tone, felt like a warm blanket on a chilly night, yet it couldn't fully quiet the nagging doubts creeping into my mind. He steered me toward a sturdy, weathered door that opened to the basement of our new suburban home, a fixer-upper we'd recently settled into just outside the city. "There's an old, rickety shelf down there, and I can't wrangle it by myself," he said, his voice smooth as butter. "You've got such a knack for this stuff, hun. I know you'll figure it out in no time." I stepped into the shadowy space, and a blast of musty, damp air slapped me right in the face, carrying that unmistakable basement smell. "James, the light's practically dead down here. I can barely make out my own hands," I called back, straining my eyes against the darkness. The reply came not in words, but in a deafening screech as the door slammed shut behind me, followed by the heavy clunk of a lock snapping into place. I whipped around, my fingers scrambling over the cold, unyielding handle, but it wouldn't give an inch. "James, this isn't a joke. Open the door this instant," I yelled, my face pressed against a tiny vent in the door, my voice shaky with a mix of anger and creeping dread. Through the faint sliver of light from the upstairs hall, I could see my husband standing there, motionless. But this wasn't the James I thought I knew. The man I'd laughed with over greasy diner breakfasts of bacon, eggs, and hash browns every lazy Sunday morning. His face, so full of warmth just minutes ago, had transformed into a hard, unreadable wall. Those eyes, once so kind, now pierced through me with a cold, distant stare. We'd only moved into this house a few months ago, a place left to me by my late dad, along with a cozy apartment in the heart of downtown. At first, James had dragged his feet about the move, muttering about how much he'd miss the bustle of city life and our favorite coffee spot on the corner. But then he'd come around, pushing to hold on to the apartment as a nest egg for our baby on the way. Back then, I'd been touched by what seemed like genuine care, brushing aside the little warning bells ringing in my head. Now, standing on the icy concrete floor in near pitch black, the reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I'd stumbled straight into a trap he'd been setting for who knows how long. Every honeyed word, every charming smile over countless cups of coffee and late-night chats had been part of a dark, meticulously crafted plan. Panic clamped around my throat, tightening with every ragged breath I took. I screamed, hammering my fists against the door until my knuckles throbbed, but my cries seemed to dissolve into the suffocating stillness of the house. I was alone, pregnant, and completely powerless. Despair morphed into a sharp, instinctive fear that spurred me into action. I couldn't just stand there, frozen, waiting for whatever he had planned next. I had to get out of this dungeon. Stumbling through the murky basement, I dragged my hands along the rough, wet walls, groping my way further into the unknown. My fingers grazed over sticky spiderwebs and random clutter, maybe old garden tools or forgotten boxes of holiday decorations, hanging in the damp air, remnants of a life I no longer recognized as my own. As I fumbled in the dim light, my hand brushed against something rough and wooden. It was an old, weathered shelf, its surface scarred and sagging under the weight of forgotten junk. I dug through the mess with desperate urgency, paying no mind to the layer of grime sticking to my palms or the occasional jab of a splinter piercing my skin. Buried deep within the clutter, I stumbled upon a small, tattered cardboard box, hidden away as if it held some long-buried mystery. Inside, beneath a jumble of ancient cassette tapes and tangled cords, my fingers grazed something hard and plastic. It was a vintage cassette recorder, so coated in dust that I could hardly make out the worn labels on the buttons in the shadowy basement. My pulse quickened, thumping loudly in my chest as if it might break free. With shaky hands, I sifted through the maze of wires, hoping to find a matching cord. At last, I pulled out one that looked promising and, holding my breath, slotted it into the device. It snapped into place with a satisfying click. This could be my ticket out of here, my one chance to escape this nightmare. I gripped that fragile thread of hope tightly, knowing I had to push forward, no matter how bleak the odds seemed. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but they weren't born of hopelessness anymore. They carried a renewed sense of purpose and raw determination. I connected the cord to a nearby outlet, half hidden behind the dusty shelf in this damp, chilly basement, and watched with bated breath as the ancient gadget, abandoned for who knows how long, sputtered to life. I flicked the small switch, and a faint red light blinked on the casing, a tiny beacon in the darkness. It's actually working. To my surprise, there was even a cassette inside, rewound to the beginning, as if it had been patiently waiting for this very moment. I raised the recorder to my mouth, struggling to keep my voice from wavering despite the fear trembling beneath my words. James locked me in here. Today is May 15th. I murmured softly, the quiet click of the recording mechanism becoming the most critical sound in this suffocating, terrifying reality I was trapped in. I didn't know if anyone would ever listen to these tapes, but now my fear had a voice, a chance to echo beyond these walls. I made a silent vow to record everything, to capture every step he took, every cold word he spoke, transforming this dusty old cassette into proof, my only defense in this living hell. It was a promise not just to myself, but to the little life growing inside me, who seemed to stir gently as if in quiet agreement. Together, we would endure. The hours crawled by, each one dragging on like a lifetime. I curled up in the farthest corner of the basement, clutching the recorder as if it were my last link to the outside world. It was my only friend, my silent witness in this icy, unforgiving prison. Above me, I heard the heavy thud of boots pacing, and a floorboard groaned right over my head, sending a chill racing down my spine. Then came the grating sound of the bolt sliding back with a harsh metallic scrape. I pressed myself tighter against the cold wall, my heart hammering so fiercely I thought it might give me away. "Hey, I brought you something to eat." James's voice sliced through the stillness, sharp and emotionless, sounding more like a stranger than the man I once trusted. "Don't want you keeling over on me just yet, huh?" A moment later, through a narrow hatch I hadn't even noticed in the gloom, a tray slid in with a lukewarm portion of mac and cheese, a crusty slice of bread that had seen better days, and a dented plastic bottle of water. Hardly a feast, but enough to keep me going. I stared at the food, the kind of quick, no-frills meal you'd slap together after a long day, and couldn't help but think of better times, like Sunday barbecues with friends, the smell of grilled burgers and apple pie lingering in the air. But here, in this basement, that world felt a million miles away. The hands that I had once held so tenderly and kissed with affection just a few days ago now felt like the talons of some monstrous beast. "Finish your food," he snapped in a harsh tone. "And don't you dare make a sound. One little noise from you, and you can forget about eating or drinking again. Understood?" I kept my mouth shut, swallowing the scream of fear and fury that was tearing at my insides. I could feel his presence just beyond the door, savoring my vulnerability, thriving on the control he wielded over me like a sick game of dominance and cruelty. It was all a part of his twisted plan, a calculated form of torment. When the sound of his heavy boots finally receded down the hallway, I reached for the water bottle with trembling, frantic fingers, downing it in desperate gulps, though I couldn't bear to even glance at the food. My stomach was twisted into knots of dread and disgust, the mere idea of eating enough to make me feel sick. Then, from upstairs, agonizingly close yet impossibly out of reach, came the unmistakable ringtone of my phone, cutting through the suffocating silence. I froze, my ears straining to catch every faint noise. James's footsteps shuffled above, followed by his voice, smooth and almost sorrowful, laced with a rehearsed kind of deception. "Hey, Mom, how's it going?" "Nah, Sophia's crashed out right now. She's been pretty exhausted lately. You know how these things go." "Yeah, don't worry. I'll pass the message along. Love you too." "Mom, I'm right here," I screamed in my mind, the words echoing uselessly inside my head. I threw myself at the door, hammering on it with every ounce of strength I had, ignoring the sharp sting as my knuckles split open and warm blood trickled down my hands. "I'm here, Mom. He's lying to you. Please come save me." But my desperate pleas were useless, muffled by the cold, unyielding stone walls and the thick wooden door that imprisoned me, cutting me off from the outside world. Utterly drained, I collapsed to the floor, tears of frustration and helplessness streaming down my face. He had orchestrated every single detail with chilling precision, systematically isolating me from anyone who might come to my rescue. Brushing away the tears with the frayed sleeve of my old hoodie, I groped for the small recorder and pressed the record button with unsteady fingers. "He just talked to my mom," I whispered, my voice quivering as fresh tears threatened to spill over once more. My words shook as I forced myself to keep speaking, pouring out my anguish into the indifferent device. "He told her I was sleeping, but that's a complete lie. He deceives everyone, weaving his web of lies without the slightest hint of guilt. Mom, if you ever listen to this, don't trust a single thing he says. He's holding me captive here, trapped in this suffocating, pitch-black hell." I spoke for what felt like an eternity, confiding in the recorder about the paralyzing fear that gripped me, the searing hatred that burned within me, and the profound, aching love I felt for my mother and the baby I carried inside me. Recording these raw, unfiltered thoughts became my only tether to sanity, a thin lifeline keeping me from drowning in the despair of this unending nightmare. The next day, indistinguishable from the last in this oppressive, windowless gloom of the basement, James trudged down the rickety stairs once again to pick up the empty tray. I had learned his patterns by heart and made sure to tuck the recorder safely under the sagging, threadbare mattress that served as my makeshift bed before he appeared. I retreated to the farthest corner of the damp, chilly space, avoiding his piercing stare, desperate to hide the raw contempt that surged through me every time I caught sight of his face. "Hey, not even a nibble, huh?" he remarked with a sneer, holding up the untouched plate of cold meatloaf and soggy mashed potatoes, typical comfort food around here, though it offered me no comfort at all. His tone carried that same mocking edge, as if my suffering was just another source of amusement for him, like catching a football game on a lazy Sunday afternoon and ribbing a buddy over a bad play. I stayed silent, knowing any response would only fuel his twisted satisfaction. James smirked as he lifted the barely touched plate of cold leftovers, likely some hastily reheated shepherd's pie or a slapped-together tuna casserole he'd scrounged from the fridge. "Go ahead, love. Don't eat if you don't want to. A growling stomach might just knock some sense into that stubborn head of yours." He dragged his feet on purpose, taking his time to head out, his heavy presence filling the room like a storm cloud. I could sense his gaze raking over the damp, cluttered basement, a smug grin tugging at his lips as if he owned not just the space, but every inch of my will. His eyes lingered on the battered old box where I'd stumbled upon the recorder, tucked among forgotten junk. "Reckon this place could use a good clear-out," he muttered, almost to himself, as he ambled toward the wobbly shelf with a slow, deliberate stride. "Gotta toss all this rubbish sooner or later." My pulse hammered in my chest, but just then, his phone blasted from upstairs, a grating, default ringtone cutting through the stillness of the house like a knife. "Bloody hell!" he snapped under his breath, his face twisting with annoyance as he rubbed the back of his neck. "All right, I'll sort this mess out later." He swung the thick door shut with a grunt, the harsh click of the bolt snapping into place, trapping me once again. I stayed rooted to the spot, barely breathing until the thump of his boots on the creaky floorboards above faded into nothing. That's when the realization crashed over me. I couldn't just sit here, rotting away, waiting for whatever he had planned. I had to act, to claw my way out of this nightmare, no matter how impossible it seemed. In the faint, flickering light, I started scouring my cage, my shaky fingers grazing over every inch. I felt along the gritty walls, the crumbling mortar between bricks, every tiny crack, hoping against hope for a loose spot or some secret hatch straight out of those gritty detective stories I used to devour. No hidden escape revealed itself, but I did uncover a sliver of something better. Up near the ceiling, almost at ground level with the outside world, my fingertips brushed against icy, rusted metal bars. It was a small basement window, probably boarded up or bricked over from the outside, but through the narrow gaps, a weak trickle of daylight slipped in, carrying the faint scent of freshly mowed lawns and the promise of freedom. I knew there was no way I could wriggle through, but maybe, just maybe, someone walking by the backyard, perhaps with their dog on a Sunday stroll, might hear me if I could make enough noise. It was a desperate gamble, a faint spark in the suffocating dark, but it beat surrendering to hopelessness. In the corner, I spotted a jagged chunk of broken brick, rough and heavy in my hand. Now I had a plan. Bide my time, wait for the right moment, and bang out a signal for help. I wasn't throwing in the towel. Not now. Not when I'd found this tiny beam of light cutting through the gloom. Time melted into an endless blur of misery, and I lost all sense of days, tracking their passage only by James's visits. He started chatting more, dropping by with a takeaway coffee cup or a half-eaten bacon roll, but his words sliced deeper than the silence ever had. He basked in his power, relishing every chance to rub my helplessness in my face. He'd slouch against the wall, casually spinning tales about the supposed efforts to find me. "Oi, darlin', I've gone and filed a missing persons report for you," he'd say with a twisted, fake concern that made my skin crawl. "The whole neighborhood's gutted for me, you know. Your mum rings up every day without fail, beside herself with worry. Poor woman's falling apart. I keep assuring her we'll track you down soon, that it'll all turn out fine in the end. I must be pretty persuasive, huh?" His voice was laced with biting sarcasm, a sly smirk curling at the corner of his mouth as he studied my face, fully aware of the way his sharp words cut deep into my soul. A cold fury churned within me, but I held my tongue. My teeth gritted so hard my jaw ached. I clutched the small recorder tightly, positioning it near the tiny gap in the door, to catch every vile syllable, every damning admission that fell from his lips. With each passing moment, the weight of this tape grew heavier in my hand, transforming into my only tether to hope, my one shot at justice in a world that had seemingly turned its back on me. One chilly evening, a woman's voice pierced the oppressive silence, drifting down from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was here. For a brief second, a spark of relief flared in my chest. Could it be my mom? Or perhaps a dear friend who'd finally pieced together where I was? But as the voice sharpened into focus, I realized it was Emma, James's sister. They were just above me, huddled in the kitchen, their murmurs filtering through the rusty old vent. I scrambled to activate the recorder, struggling to keep my breathing even as I documented their conversation, adding yet another name to the list of those conspiring against me. Their icy, calculated words etched another grim entry into my audio log of treachery. "So, how's our little guest holding up?" Emma's voice boomed with reckless indifference, not even attempting to hush her tone as if I were nothing more than a forgotten piece of furniture. "She's keeping to herself for now," James answered, his tone casual with a hint of a shrug. "I bet she'll crack completely before long. Just don't overdo it, all right?" Emma let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "We need her in one piece, and the baby too. Gotta make sure she carries to term without any drama before someone accidentally finds her stashed away out in the backwoods. Otherwise, that cozy little condo of hers slips right out of our grasp." I slapped a hand over my mouth to muffle a gasp, my pulse hammering in my ears so loudly I thought they might hear it. His own sister, his own family, was part of this twisted scheme. They'd planned every sick detail together. My life, and the life of my unborn child, meant less than nothing to them, reduced to mere pawns in their ruthless game to claim my home. To them, I wasn't human. I was just a tool, a stepping stone to be used up and discarded without a second thought. This bitter truth struck harder than the suffocating walls around me, a blow to the gut that left me dizzy with despair. The danger had doubled. I was now pitted against two cold-blooded schemers who'd stop at nothing to get what they wanted. I leaned against the freezing concrete wall, feeling the faint flutters of my baby moving inside me, a quiet reminder of why I couldn't give up. I had to make it out of this hell for both of us. I had to bring them down. The betrayal wasn't just James's doing. It was his whole family turning their backs on me, and that realization shattered what little resolve I had left. The constant dread and unrelenting fear started to wear me down physically, the pressure becoming an unbearable burden. Late that night, after a tense silence that felt like hours, a searing pain shot through my stomach, sharp enough to make me double over. False contractions, I'd later figure out, but in that moment, I was certain I was going into labor. Right there on a filthy, freezing mattress in the pitch-dark basement, with nothing but the distant hum of crickets outside and the faint smell of damp mildew for company. Panic gripped me like a vice, squeezing tighter with every shallow breath. I couldn't help but think of simpler times, of Sunday barbecues with friends, the smoky aroma of grilled burgers and hot dogs wafting through the air, or casual chats over a cup of coffee at the local diner, where you'd call out a friendly, "Hey, buddy," to the waiter for a refill. Now, those small comforts felt like a distant dream, stolen by the cruel reality of my captivity. I couldn't bear the thought of my child coming into this world in such a wretched, God-forsaken place. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I hammered on the heavy door, pleading with James for any kind of help, my knuckles scraped and stinging from the relentless effort. "Hey, James, come on, I'm hurtin' bad down here," I cried out, my voice hoarse and breaking under the weight of despair. But from upstairs, there was only a haunting, oppressive silence. Either he couldn't hear my cries, or he simply didn't give a damn. It felt like he was just waiting, biding his time for nature to take its toll, for me to grow even more frail and defenseless. When the waves of pain finally subsided, leaving me weak and shivering on the cold floor, I fumbled for the small recorder with trembling fingers. I knew deep down that surviving real labor in this prison, without even a sip of water or a kind word to cling to, might be impossible. Sobs racked my body as I pressed record, tears splattering onto the device as I poured my heart into what could be my last words. "My precious little one, I don't know if I'll ever get to cradle you in my arms," I murmured into the microphone, my voice fragile and splintering with every syllable. "But I want you to know that I love you more than life itself. I've fought for you with every last bit of strength in my bones. If you ever listen to this recording, go find your grandma. She'll share all the stories about me. And please, make sure someone makes them answer for what they've done to us. Hold your father accountable for every ounce of pain he's inflicted on us." The very next morning, I caught the murmur of their voices drifting down again. James and Emma were hunched over the kitchen table, plotting their vile plan over steaming mugs of black coffee and a half-eaten stack of pancakes. A classic Sunday brunch turned sinister with their chilling words. "What about the baby, though?" Emma asked, her voice so nonchalant it might as well have been about grabbing milk from the corner store. "We'll just leave them at a foster home. Who even cares?" James shot back with an icy shrug, as if they were talking about dumping an old couch on the curb. "We don't need the kid in the picture. All we want is the house. Once the paperwork's signed over, both the mother and child can disappear for good." Hearing their cold-blooded scheme, my heart froze solid. Every shred of affection I'd once held for this man had withered into nothing but bitterness and a burning rage. In that moment, fear melted away, replaced by an unyielding resolve. I will make it through this. I'll make them regret every heartless word, every tear they forced from me, every minute of this unbearable torment. A glimmer of hope sparked when I least expected it. Later that day, I heard the low growl of a vehicle pulling up outside. Not just any car, but something heavier, maybe a UPS truck dropping off a package. Then a gruff, unfamiliar voice bellowed, "Delivery here! Need someone to sign for this!" This was my chance, possibly my only one. I snatched up a rough chunk of brick I'd stashed away, hauled an old milk crate over to the wall, and despite the stabbing pain in my lower back, clambered up with clenched teeth. I began striking the rusted metal grate of the tiny window with all the strength I could muster. The noise wasn't much, but in the quiet of the suburban backyard, with only the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, I prayed it would carry. Someone had to hear it. "Hey, what's that racket over there?" a voice called out, and my heart leapt with a desperate flicker of possibility. A sharp shout from the delivery driver pierced the stillness of the afternoon, sending my pulse racing like a jackhammer. My hands pounded with renewed fury, each desperate blow fueled by a volatile mix of fear, anger, and the last flickers of hope I could muster. From outside, James's voice rang out, casual and dismissive, as he stepped onto the porch with a strained laugh that seemed to brush off any hint of trouble. "Hey, just my kid messing around in the garage again," he called loudly, ensuring his words carried over any suspicious noise. I could hear him fiddle with his old Bluetooth speaker, soon blaring a lively country song. The kind you'd tap your foot to at a 4th of July cookout with ribs and coleslaw on the table. Its twangy notes flooding the backyard and smothering the sound of my frantic hammering. "Always fixing something, that little grease monkey of ours. Come on over, I'll sign for the package," he added smoothly, steering the driver away from the house. Their footsteps gradually faded into the distance, and soon the rumble of the delivery van signaled its departure, dragging away the last sliver of my dwindling hope. Exhausted, I clambered down from the rickety crate, my body heavy with defeat. It felt as though the whole world was plotting against me, leaving me with nothing but aching limbs and a hollow heart. I slumped onto the worn-out mattress in the dim basement, my eyes fixed on the oppressive darkness, no longer holding out for a miracle. I had nearly resigned myself to the grim reality that this dank, suffocating space would be my grave. Just another forgotten casualty of their ruthless greed. My mind drifted into a foggy stupor until the sound of James's boots thudding closer snapped me back. He paused just beyond the basement door, assuming I was either passed out or too broken to care, and began muttering to himself in a low, self-assured tone, the kind of smug whisper that belongs to someone who thinks they've got it all figured out. "Just hold tight a bit longer," he murmured, maybe to me, maybe to the stale air around him. "Give it another week or so. Once the baby's here, I'll take you on a quiet drive out to the backwoods, and the doc will scribble up a report about your crippling depression and habit of wandering off. Everyone will eat it up. No one's gonna ask questions. You'll just vanish. The kid stays with me." I lay motionless, my breath shallow, as my trembling yet resolute fingers pressed the record button on the tiny device I'd kept hidden. He'd just served up his own downfall on a silver platter, without even realizing it. In that moment, a fire sparked within me. No more waiting for someone to save me. I had to fight back while I still had the strength. That final, chilling confession from my husband was the tipping point, the match that set ablaze a fierce resolve deep inside. Fear and hopelessness dissolved, replaced by a cold, unyielding determination that refused to let me remain a powerless victim awaiting my fate. I became a hunter in my own right, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike, And that moment came sooner than I expected. In the dead of night, a sudden, searing pain ripped through me, sharp and relentless, unlike anything I'd ever felt. This wasn't just discomfort. It was intense, rhythmic, and growing stronger by the minute. I knew right away my water had broken. My baby had chosen this moment to make its entrance, and with it came my final, desperate chance to escape. It was now or never. Either I broke free from this prison of a basement, or we'd both be doomed to perish in this suffocating trap. Summoning every last drop of strength, I shoved aside the crippling pain and exhaustion threatening to drag me under, ready to fight for our survival. A daring, almost foolhardy plan was taking shape in my mind, though I knew it was a gamble I couldn't avoid. Every morning, at nearly the same time, James would trudge down the creaky stairs to bring me something to eat, usually a slapped-together ham and cheese sandwich or some reheated meatloaf from the Greasy Spoon diner around the corner. He was so smug, so certain of my defeat, that the thought of me fighting back never even crossed his mind. That overconfidence was his Achilles heel, and it was my only ticket out of this hellhole. I began to groan, starting with faint whimpers that grew into piercing cries, mimicking the desperate sounds of a woman in the throes of labor, teetering on the edge of breaking. I knew he'd hear me. He couldn't risk losing me before the baby arrived. My child was the key to his sick, twisted plans. It wasn't long before I heard the thump of rushed footsteps overhead, followed by a string of grumbled curses and the metallic scrape of the bolt being yanked back. "Hey, what's all this racket? Is the kid coming already, or what?" He snapped through the door, his voice dripping with annoyance rather than worry, as if I'd just spoiled his sacred morning ritual of sipping black coffee and scrolling through his phone. "Please, I'm in agony. You've got to help me," I wailed in response, infusing my voice with every ounce of genuine fear and suffering I could muster, letting it quiver with the raw desperation that wasn't hard to summon. I steadied myself, clutching a rough, heavy chunk of brick I'd unearthed from a damp corner of this dank basement. Tucked beneath a frayed old towel nearby was my hidden ace, a tiny voice recorder I'd somehow kept out of his sight. I crouched near the door, melting into the shadows where I'd be out of view at first glance. The oppressive darkness that had been my constant enemy for so long now became my shield, wrapping me in its cover. I knew I'd get only one shot at this, one swing, and failure wasn't an option. The door groaned open, a weak sliver of muted light spilling in, barely denting the suffocating gloom of my cage. James stepped inside, expecting to see me doubled over on the threadbare mattress, helpless and racked with pain, but instead, he found nothing but empty space. For a split second, he hesitated, confusion flickering across his face as he squinted into the dark. That was my moment. I burst from the shadows just behind the door, where the faint hallway light couldn't touch me, and swung the brick with all the strength I had left in me. It struck the back of his head with a nauseating, hollow crack. He didn't even have time to yell. His body went rigid for an instant before crumpling to the ground like a discarded rag doll, sprawled awkwardly across the icy concrete. I didn't pause to see if he was breathing or not. Truth be told, I didn't give a damn. Battling another crippling wave of contractions that nearly dropped me to my knees, I stepped over the motionless figure of the man who'd once been my partner, but had long since turned into my jailer. Gripping the recorder tightly in my trembling hand, I staggered into the narrow hallway, drawing in the slightly less stale air as if it were pure oxygen after a lifetime underwater. Every step shot searing pain through my body, but the promise of freedom and protecting my unborn child drove me onward. With shaky fingers, I shoved the heavy door closed behind me, now standing on the other side, and slid the bolt shut with a decisive clank. This time, he was the one trapped, and I wasn't looking back. I stumbled into the kitchen, my body heavy with exhaustion, where my phone rested on the cluttered countertop, plugged into its charger beside a cold, half-drunk cup of black coffee and a crumpled pack of Marlboros, clear signs of his messy, thoughtless habits. My legs wobbled beneath me, threatening to collapse. But I couldn't afford to give up now. Not when I was so close to escaping this living hell that had trapped me for far too long. My hands shook uncontrollably, making it nearly impossible to grip the phone. But through sheer willpower, I managed to dial 911. "Hello, emergency services?" I wheezed into the receiver, my breathing shallow and frantic. "Please, I need help right now. My husband has locked me in and I'm in labor. My address?" I practically yelled it out, my voice breaking under the weight of panic and pain. "Please hurry, I'm desperate." After hanging up, I quickly tapped in another number, my mom's. "Hey, Mom, I'm holding on," I murmured, my words barely audible as another sharp contraction bent me double, a wave of agony ripping through me. I had done all I could at that point. I'd managed to record the horrifying truth using my phone's voice memo app, capturing every damning detail, and had fought tooth and nail to break free from this torment. Now, all that was left was to wait for rescue, clinging to hope. Collapsing onto the cold kitchen tiles, my back pressed against the fridge, I fixed my gaze on the front door, ears straining for the distant howl of sirens, a sound that would signal the end of this nightmare and the beginning of a new chapter for me and my unborn child. Soon enough, the shrill cry of sirens grew louder, closer, and to me, it was like hearing a choir of angels. Within moments, a loud banging rattled the door. "Police, open up immediately." With every last shred of strength I could muster, I dragged myself across the floor and twisted the knob. Two officers stood in the doorway, flanked by a team of paramedics. The second they laid eyes on me, pale as a sheet, blood-streaked, my belly swollen to the point of bursting, they didn't need a single word of explanation. As the medics gently hoisted me onto a stretcher, handling me with the care you'd give a fragile heirloom, I couldn't stop the words from tumbling out in a frantic, jumbled mess, terrified I'd forget something vital. "He's downstairs, my husband. He trapped me in here," I muttered weakly, my voice fading. "The recording's on the shelf by the microwave. Please get it. It's got everything you need." One officer nodded and descended to the basement, returning shortly with James, who stumbled along, a bloody bandage wrapped around his head from some earlier altercation. When his eyes met mine, surrounded by law enforcement, he knew his sick game was over. There was no bewilderment in his expression, just pure, helpless fury boiling beneath the surface. Without a second thought, they slapped cuffs on him and dragged him off. I was whisked away to the hospital, and that same night, in a sterile, safe room under the vigilant care of doctors, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. My little miracle, my reason to keep going. That audio recording on my phone became the cornerstone of the case against him. It held every incriminating word, my voice, James's, and even his sister Emma's, leaving them no chance to deny their involvement. It captured every detail of their twisted intentions, their chilling scheme, and their callous discussions over late-night diner takeout, greasy burgers and fries, planning as casually as if they were debating what show to stream next. Emma was taken into custody the following day. The trial was quick, ruthless, and left no room for doubt. The harrowing tale of a pregnant woman held captive in her own basement over a disputed piece of real estate sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Folks couldn't help but gossip about it over greasy diner breakfasts of pancakes and bacon, or while grabbing a carton of orange juice at the corner store. James and Emma were handed the harshest penalties possible, and the judge didn't mince words during the sentencing, making it clear that such cruelty wouldn't be tolerated. It's been a full year since that nightmare unfolded. Here I am, settled in my warm, sunlit apartment right in the heart of the city, the very place they schemed to take from me. My sweet little daughter is chuckling away on the soft carpet, surrounded by her favorite stuffed animals and building blocks. As I watch her tiny hands stack the toys, my heart feels light, completely free of the dread that once gripped me, replaced by a boundless wave of affection. I've come out on top. I didn't merely endure. I emerged from that suffocating darkness with the most precious gift life could offer. I fought for and won back my independence, secured justice, held onto my home, and above all, welcomed my beautiful girl into this world. I've grown tougher, and now, I'm fully aware of the lengths I'll go to shield my child from harm. I've learned through bitter experience that even when life traps you in the bleakest, most desolate corner, there's always a way forward. Sometimes you've got to forge that escape route yourself, with sheer determination, raw courage, and an unyielding drive to push through, no matter how steep the odds. On quiet evenings, I sip my chamomile tea by the window, listening to the distant hum of the city, and I'm reminded of small victories too, like the friendly nod from my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, when we pass each other at the mailbox, or the quick chat about the weather while waiting for the bus. I even laugh now at the petty squabbles over parking spots outside the building, the kind of everyday friction that once seemed trivial, but now feels like a reassuring sign of normalcy. I've rebuilt my life, brick by brick, and every giggle from my daughter is a reminder of why I kept fighting.